When we think of disease, we tend to think of something physical. But already we are aware now that there is really such a thing as mental disease. And the truth is that there is also such a thing as spiritual disease. Anything that takes us out of attunement with our source can be called disease. When we approach the question of health and disease and of healing ourselves and keeping ourselves in perfect health, it's important that we try to understand it from the center outward. Otherwise, you find a great deal of conflicting ideals, conflicting principles, what to speak of conflicting practices, because you are looking at the thing from one angle and not seeing the whole. Like that story of the 6 blind men who were washing an elephant, and they got into a big argument. You probably all know the story, because one was claiming that the elephant was a big wall. He'd been washing the sides. And another one was saying, no, from my own experience, I know the elephant is a couple of fans. He'd been washing the ears. And the third one said, why, that's ridiculous. I don't know how you can talk like that when I know from my experience that he's a couple of tusks, a couple of bones hanging from heaven, and he was washing the tusk. And the other one said, well, no, to me, he's really just a string. And he'd been washing the tail. And the 6th one said, no, I know from absolute certainty that the elephant is 4 pillars. And of course, he'd been washing the legs. And the truth was, of course, that they were all right and all wrong. Right in their own experience, wrong in thinking that the truth was limited to that experience. Now, when we approach the subject from the outside, then we fragment it, and we don't see its relationships one to another. There are 2 principles that I would like to start with then in our discussion this morning and in presenting the whole question of healing. The first is that the closer you get to the essence of reality, the more you have control over various aspects of reality. That is to say, it's sort of like a genealogical chart. 5 children over here, but only 2 parents. And several pairs of parents, all controlled by just 1 or 2 people coming from that. Or like a hierarchy or echelons in the army, which work according to the same system, that the person at the top controls maybe 5 colonels, who in turn may control 20 majors, who control maybe 50 captains, who may control hundreds of soldiers. And so it is that the closer you get to the top, except that here we should use the analogy more of the center of our being, the more we find that we have control over a number of different phenomena. When I was visiting Satya Sai Baba, it was very intriguing to see the way he would manifest these different things. I'm not going to argue the question as to whether he ought to do it or not. He feels he ought to. I think that's his business. A lot of people say, oh, people shouldn't perform miracles like that in public and so on. Well, I don't know. I found him to be a very joyful and wonderful, beautiful person. But the intriguing thing, that question aside, was the simple fact that he could do it. He just went like that, and there was this necklace. Now, how could he do it under ordinary circumstances? You'd think of a scientist in a laboratory working with all those. Supposing he got the technique for materializing things out of energy. Think of the machinery involved. Think of the laborious process of converting each one of those atoms into a crystal. Think of the millions of dollars and the complexity. And here Satya Sai Baba just goes like that, and there's a necklace. Think of the tremendous pressure they have to put on stones in order to make synthetic rubies. Tremendous machinery, tremendous heat, tremendous everything. Think again now of the molecules. This is a very good illustration of many, many aspects of the spiritual path. the molecules in a bar magnet. If that bar magnet has not yet been magnetized, if it's just a bar of steel, then all those molecules will be, each one will have its own north-south polarity, but they'll all be turned in many different directions. In effect, they cancel one another out so that the bar has no magnetism. When the bar of steel is magnetized, it doesn't get anything it didn't have before. All that happens is that the molecules are aligned in a north-south direction, and giving their strength to one another, the whole bar of metal assumes the property of magnetism. Now, supposing you were to go in there and try to turn each one of those molecules in a north-south direction, it would take forever. There must be maybe billions of molecules in a simple little magnet, certainly many millions. And by the time you had gone past the first 10 and were working on the others, the first 10 would start moving around in their own directions again, like the flamingo in the croquet game in Alice in Wonderland, where they, instead of a croquet mallet, they had flamingos. And the flamingo, which had vaguely the shape of a mallet, instead of acting like a mallet, would just about the point when Alice was about to strike the hedgehog, which also got up and walked away, the flamingo would look up like this at her. Well, this is the way that the world would act if we worked on it only from outside, because these things have their own way of moving. To try to control the world from outside, and this applies to our physical lives and so on too, that when we try to control things outside, we get all tense and things go wrong. But I'm talking first from the subtler aspect of it, even subtler than the mind. The fact is that with magnetism, all you need to do is introduce either a flow of electricity or put it next to a magnet so that there is a current flowing that automatically turns those molecules in the right direction. Paramahansa Yogananda said that someday they will discover subtler laws of matter rather than those heavy sort of push-me, pull-you kind of laws that make it seem quite impossible for man to travel to other stars. But he says that there are other laws that are subtler that will make it possible to travel between planets and between stars and to go distances that now are inconceivable simply because it would take so many generations to reach the nearest stars. But he says these can be bypassed. Many, many laws that we're discovering already a little bit, not those laws, but others, like this simple thing of magnetism, that illustrate what somebody like Satya Sai Baba does. He's not working with this material rule of turning each thing, of working with outward rules. He's working with a flow. That flow of consciousness, that flow of energy, that flow of magnetism, this flow, if we can get into, then from that we can work outward and have a great deal more control over the laws of this physical world, including health and all aspects of health. It's known now that many diseases are really psychosomatic. They're induced by mental worry, tension, frustration, and so on. More than that, ultimately speaking, there is only one reality, and that is consciousness. Everything in this world has been created by consciousness. It is a dream in the mind of the Creator. And if we can get into His consciousness more, everything can be brought into a state of harmony. Now, the other principle that I wanted to bring out, and then to come back to these things more in detail, is that we must learn to relate to every reality on its own level. Because this dream does have its own reality. If you're dreaming, then that dream is real. Paramahansa Yogananda used to say that you can say that this world is a dream, but if you're dreaming and you hit your head in your dream against a brick wall, your dream head is going to hurt. And it's not enough to say it's a dream, you must also wake up from the dream. And so it is that we must understand, and this is a big mistake that is made in a lot of healing circles, to try to say, which is actually the truth, that the spiritual rules, the spiritual laws are the essence of it, and that we don't need to think about the others. It's true that the essence of all physical troubles, not only health, but every other kind of trouble, is rooted in spiritual ignorance. That's taking it as far as you can go, really. We get rid of that ignorance and you've become all-wise, and there can be no trouble then. But at the same time, even though that is the deepest truth, as long as we are functioning on a particular level, we have to accept that as a present level of reality. That these different levels of reality do exist. They are real on their own level. When we can transcend that level, then perhaps they cease to exist. But not as long as we're on that level. And here is where you find a great deal of misunderstanding and argument and intolerance. For example, between the Orthodox medical profession and those who are engaged in spiritual healing. Spiritual healing is the higher kind of healing, but that doesn't mean that the other kind is not necessary in its own time. I know of a man who was a Christian Scientist, and he had an abscessed tooth and refused to heal it because he said he was going to do it by faith. And Yogananda kept trying to tell him that your faith isn't strong enough yet because you haven't got the realization, which is what is the essence of faith. It's not just stubborn and blind belief. You haven't reached that point yet where you can heal your tooth by faith. He says, why don't you go to a doctor and to a dentist and have him either take the tooth out, or I guess this was before root canal irrigation, so I think he had just said have him take it out. The man refused to do so and he died. Yogananda was talking about a woman who was complaining of some difficulty, and she went to a practitioner, and the practitioner said, oh, it's all in your mind, it isn't real. So he kept talking like this, but it wasn't getting through to her because it was very real to her. So she sort of surreptitiously slipped her shoe off. She had a very long, hard heel on her shoe. And when he wasn't looking, she reached up with the shoe and banged him on the head. He said, "Oh, why'd you do that?" She said, "It's all in your mind." So what he was saying is not that you cannot reach the point where you see it's all in your mind and it doesn't matter. But until you've reached that point, it isn't commonsensical to say that that level of reality doesn't exist. And so it is that people working on different levels of reality are able to reach people on those levels of reality or conditions that are on those levels of reality. If you've got a broken bone, then a doctor should set it. I don't think that you should sit there and pray for it to be set for you, because the laws have been perfectly well discovered how you can do it for yourself. There are physical laws which if you don't, I've seen a lot of people in the matter of trying to make money, thinking that it's all going to come just, again, by faith, hoping that customers will come and hoping that everything will go well, but not putting out the energy to make it happen. Well, there are laws that help a person to succeed in business, they help a person to become a good athlete. You can't dream yourself into becoming a great athlete. There were some Indian sadhus who came to an Olympics thing in Geneva many years ago, and their method of preparing for big events was to run in a circle and chant Om. And I don't recall that they broke any records. In fact, I don't recall that they placed. Their system was probably very valid, but they also needed to do the necessary work to develop strength or speed or whatever it is that they were trying to do. So the medical profession, too, is intolerant of people who try to work with subtler realms, with spiritual healing and with healing with energy and so on. But this, too, is not understanding that there are those levels of reality and that those levels can work depending on the strength of the person healing in that way, depending upon the receptivity of the person being healed. The more a person can live and function on that level, the more that is the level that will be able to cure him. The less he's able to, the less he'll be able to work on that particular level. And that really accounts for a great deal of the apparent contradiction between so many different schools of healing, that they're working with different levels. But there's another thing to be said, and this is a negative aspect on the subject of spiritual and mental and energy healing. And that is that having realized that there is a level of reality that is subtler than matter, they somehow imagine that it's vaguer than matter. One must be as specific in his investigations and in his study of spiritual things as he is in material things. And I have found again and again in various books on healing that people will discover that a thing works once and assume that this is a cosmic and absolute verity. Well, it may not be. It may be that some other thing was actually the explanation for why this happened. And so the same careful investigation is needed in the spiritual healing fields as has been put into effect in medical sciences and other more obvious sciences. It's a lot easier to investigate obvious things that you can see with your eyes. You can point out and say, look, and everybody looks and can see. Not everybody can look through the spiritual eye and see the same thing. Most people can't see the spiritual eye, let alone look through it. And so it's a lot harder to investigate on a spiritual level. But it is going to be absolutely necessary. When you read the different books on healing, and when you find that everybody is saying something completely in contradiction to what a lot of other people are saying, you end up practically nowhere. I mentioned to some person who was in healing a few years ago about some very healthful breakfast I was having with brewer's yeast and God knows what else. And she said, oh, no wonder you're so sick. Well, I wasn't so sick to begin with, but I had to be because I didn't agree with her particular theory, whatever it might be. So you find each person comes up with something, and 10 other people will say, oh, that's the worst thing you can do. And where are you left? We must bring the teaching down to a level of practical experimentation and testing what will work and understanding that what will work for some people won't necessarily work for everybody, because we're also dealing with their levels of reality. We're also dealing with that level of reality is not necessarily a question of higher or lower. There are spheres within spheres. Yogananda pointed out that people, for example, who are emotional, you can reach them in one way, you can't reach them in an intellectual way. He was talking of affirmations particularly, but affirmations are a very important aspect of spiritual healing. Incidentally, I just had a bright idea this morning, and I think it would be possible to implement it, that you have a cassette with affirmations recorded on it with a good, strong, positive consciousness, and then a clock to time it to wake you up with these affirmations. And the first thing you do in the morning is hear these affirmations and say them. I think it could be a wonderful thing. You know, I went through a period many years ago where I was just tired out all the time, and I used affirmations that someone suggested to me. The moment I woke up in the morning, I'd stand up and I'd say, I'm awake, energetic, enthusiastic, like this, using my body as well as my mind. And it really worked wonders. This plus a few other things. Another affirmation I found very helpful was beating my body like this. This was suggested by the person who invented that system. Beating my body with my fist like this and saying, I'm master of my body, I'm master of myself, like this. And it really sort of, especially when your mind is sort of waking up and so susceptible to whatever goes on, open, it really worked very well. And other affirmations that could be applied in a general way to waking people up and then affirming good, positive, wholesome thoughts. and different tapes maybe for people with different problems. I think it could be a very, very helpful thing. And then at night, when you go to sleep, to have the same kind of affirmation just before you go to sleep, and then something that would shut it off automatically. We've got all the mechanism to do it, clock radios and so on. It's just that I haven't actually heard of it being done, but perhaps it already has been done, I'm not sure. Well, anyway, the different spheres of reality that we all live in are not necessarily only higher or lower. They may also simply apply to different kinds of temperament, different kinds of delusion, different kinds of spiritual inclination and interest. A person who is interested in art is going to be attracted in one way. A person more interested in music is going to be attracted another way. And music can be a wonderful therapy, and so also can color. But these different kinds of therapy can be used very effectively for the right kinds of people. And this is the sort of thing that a great deal of investigation needs to be done. Without any investigation, however, we can still speak of certain principles. And my purpose this morning was to try to get to the essence of these things, because when you get to the hub of a wheel, then as the wheel turns, it continues to turn steadily. But if you rest the wheel anywhere but at the very center of it, then any kind of turning will become lopsided, and the farther you get off center, the more difficult it is to turn it at all. But even a little bit off center, if the wheel's turning very fast, it may just fly apart. So in every truth, if we can get to the essence of it, then that essence can be applied in all sorts of different directions. Now, I talked about the idea of the magnet. And I said this is a very important principle in spiritual development too. Well, our own spines are like bar magnets. And when the energy is flowing very strongly in the spine, this is why chiropractic is a very, very valid thing too. The only thing unvalid about it is the claim of some chiropractors to be able to heal everything just through chiropractic. That isn't true. But it is true that a great deal rests upon the free flow of energy in the spine. And it's much more than that. Whenever you have a desire, whenever you have created a tendency in your mind, this becomes like a little vortex of energy, a little seed of consciousness which becomes buried in your spine. And the spine becomes blocked by perhaps literally trillions of all these tendencies that have come about over many incarnations. All these little vortices of energy, these blockages, which, what happens when you got a vortex? It's always drawing energy to itself instead of releasing that energy for use in something else. So every time you get a desire, there is that little vortex formed that draws energy to itself and away from whatever it is that you would like to do apart from that desire with your life. Let's say you're longing for truth, you're longing for God. When we wake up and understand what life's all about, then we understand that this longing for God represents the only true longing we can have, because it's the only one that can really be fulfilled. Other fulfillments are temporary. Other fulfillments are delusive in the fact that they don't really fulfill even when we've got them. You think, oh boy, look at this wonderful ice cream cone, but after it's gone, so what? It isn't really you. It's a vicarious kind of feeding. It's like trying to feed someone else during a famine and saying that I will satisfy my hunger by feeding this loved one. Well, up to a point you can gain energy that way. Beyond that point, you'll still starve to death. And so this body isn't yourself, and you try to feed the body, and you try to tell yourself, well, I love my body so much that I'm feeding myself. But the time comes when your soul begins to languish because you haven't been feeding it, you've only been feeding your body. And so spiritually and then finally physically, you die. Any kind of fulfillment away from God, away from a realization of our true nature, represents a temporary and delusive fulfillment. imaginary is why I call it delusive. You think you're satisfying yourself, you're not. You're only satisfying your body, and yourself is still starving. And so, when all our energy can flow up through the spine toward the brain, this is when we attain spiritual enlightenment. When all that energy is drawn up from the South Pole at the base of the spine to the North Pole at the top of the head in the Sahasrara, this is the subtle teaching of the spiritual path, the teachings of yoga, then divine enlightenment occurs. And it's only people who have attained divine enlightenment who have, through all time and in all cultures, made the very definite statement that they have attained everything that they were ever seeking. Nobody else says it. Nobody else is in a position to say it. But no one after achieving it has said ever that, well, it's okay for those who like it. It's just not so, because this is your own self. And so it is that the real magnetism that we can develop in the spine comes from being able to bring all our energy flow in a north-south direction so that the energy doesn't merely flow freely in the spine, but so that it flows upward in the spine toward the brain. But there are temporary magnetism. There is many different kinds of magnetism. So let's say there are magnetisms, which is not really a good way to put it, types of magnetism that can be achieved anytime we can get a certain amount of energy flowing in any one direction, even though it be temporarily or though it be a kind of temporary delusive flow of energy. Let's say that a person wants to be a musician. There are a lot of people who want to, but just can't somehow get that flow together enough so that it really happens. Some people, maybe over incarnations, maybe in one lifetime, they work hard enough to be able to develop that flow in this lifetime. But they really, as Yogananda put it, they've convinced their minds that this is what they can do, and their energy starts to flow really strongly in that direction. Now, what makes them successful as musicians? The fact that that energy flow being strong enough creates an aura of magnetism which draws to themselves the kinds of inspiration that they're looking for. And this is what our body is too. This magnet in the spine, when that energy flows strongly in any way, but particularly up toward the brain, that spiritual magnetism is the strongest. But this is the cause of the human aura. The human aura is that magnetic field around the body that is produced by a strong flow of energy in the spine. Now, when that aura is weak, whether it be from bad karma, even masters have to pay off past karma until they're completely free. This is why they may become ill even after they're highly developed, because they have created something on that particular level of reality, and their body has to suffer that on that level, unless they choose to put out the energy to negate that, which they don't always, because they sometimes feel this is a better way to work out the karma. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you're very spiritual, nothing goes wrong with you. It certainly means that you can transcend it, and it certainly means that whatever comes to you will be greatly minimized. But a very strong karma, that requires a very, very strong kind of energy. So what we're actually working with is two things. One is the strength of the aura, and the other is the strength of whatever it is that's coming to you. But the principle is nonetheless valid on all levels. And that is that if that energy flow in the spine is very strong, then there will be a very strong aura. And when that aura is very strong, then it's going to take very, very powerful negative energy to be able to penetrate through it. And almost everything that comes will be thrown away, thrown off, like punching a pillow. You just can't get through it. There was a very interesting story, which I mentioned in my seminars when I was crossing the country, about a woman who was psychic and could see auras. And she was in a department store, and she was about to step into the elevator, and suddenly she stepped back, and the door closed, the cable broke, and everybody in that car fell to his death. And she was thinking later, what made me step back? It was an instinctive response. And she realized that it was because she didn't see any auras around those people. Their karmic time had come to go, and as a result their auras had withdrawn, and they had no protection against the least thing, and that was why that thing could happen. Now, it seems very strange, the mechanism that working between a broken cable and the fact of these people having no auras. But the subtle ways that the laws of karma work are really, they transcend, as far as I can see, they transcend any or much of the level of reason that I can apply, at least. For example, you take a man on the battlefield, and this has been known to happen again and again and again. A man on the battlefield, somehow knowing he won't be killed, and he goes among bullets flying everywhere, and they just don't seem to touch him. And then one morning he wakes up. He wakes up in the morning and knows that this is the day that a bullet will have his name on it, so to speak, and that's the day that he is killed. Now, mechanically, all you can say is that the bullets are just going. You can't say that because this person's karma or his aura is strong enough or whatever it is that a bullet comes this way and then goes bloop over his head and goes on. You know it doesn't happen that way. What is it that makes it possible for him to escape? Is it that on some subtle level he is able to somehow miss these bullets? Or is it a two-way thing? I don't know. I really don't know. It's an intriguing subject. Why these people with their bad auras or no auras should get into an elevator whose cable is just about to break, that I don't know. But the law does work in this way. And this is true too, that it may not be your karma to go down with that elevator. But if it isn't a strong enough karma on your part not to go down on that elevator, you may be killed anyway by the power of mass karma. We all have to go at some time. But it is true that we can prevent ourselves, we can protect ourselves against a great many things that would be of a mass karma type or that would be of a weaker kind of karma. Let's say that you have hit somebody in a past life with this much pressure. And you know that sometime, knowing the law of karma, you're going to be hit that way again. Just because you've hit him, you're going to be hit. So you, in the meantime, build up your strength so that you can receive that blow. When it hits you, you may not feel it, whereas if you were weak, it might hurt you. So it is that when you can strengthen your aura, then you will be strong enough so that whatever comes to you won't be able to get through unless it itself is very strong. Sarada Ma, the wife of Ramakrishna, said that if it's your karma to lose a leg, you may get only a scratch. When this means that the greatest protection spiritually of all is the protection of meditation and devotion, the awakening of divine love in the heart. This is something that I find missing in most books on healing. They talk of mechanisms, but they don't talk of states of consciousness. And when they talk of states of consciousness, they talk about them more in a mechanical way, but they don't talk of love, which in fact is the strongest flow of energy of all. Sri Yukteswar, who was himself a Jnana avatar, a master, an incarnation of divine wisdom, and yet he said that the most important thing on the spiritual path, without which you can't put one foot in front of the other, is to develop the natural love of the heart, devotion to God, devotion to truth. This love, this heart quality, directs such a strong flow of energy that, apart from all techniques, with this flow of energy, it creates such a strong aura around the body that Sri Yukteswar said, inharmonies are automatically destroyed. Well, this is a very important point that we can discuss even in, as I'm doing, in a scientific way. It directs a strong flow of energy upward, creates this kind of aura, which is in itself a very vital protection. Now, here we are in a community that has been here, its beginnings were over 11 years ago. With this many people, with the many people who have come through here, the law of averages would practically dictate a few serious accidents. It's been quite amazing that the people living here, doing spiritual practices, their own auras strengthened by the fact of being in an environment with so many other people who are meditating, it's an incredible thing that nothing serious really has happened. Vijay fell from a tree a couple of years ago, 50 feet up, a free fall all the way to the ground. He was picking cones for the U.S. forestry. Free fall, 50 feet, that's enough to kill anybody. He was hobbling around for a couple of weeks and then he was fine. That an experience that a lot of you know and that I've mentioned in my seminars for its aptness was Kalyani last summer when she fell 10 feet onto a spike, rusty spike 18 inches long. It went into the upper part of her thigh and she fell one direction and it tore a gash 6 inches long, and then she fell the opposite direction, it tore a gash 3 inches long, and she literally felt an aura of protection around her, not only while she was falling, but all the way to the hospital. And the doctor, looking at this gash, just said he couldn't believe it. He said no surgeon could have made a cleaner cut or a safer cut. It missed bones, internal organs, arteries, veins, nerves, everything. This is the sort of thing that I'm talking about. The law of averages means that sooner or later that karma will be strong enough so that somebody will get something. I mean, death itself has to come someday, but it is a remarkable thing that in this environment and in the monasteries in SRF also, I don't remember serious things happening. But I remember one boy lost a thumb once, and Master said he had seen a black cloud over that boy. Black cloud. Again, this karma works on subtle levels, and through the aura, or the weakened aura, then these things can happen. So when we talk of spiritual healing, while it's very good, and it's a level of reality that needs to be dealt with when that is the problem, balancing our chemicals, balancing this thing and that thing, these are all very important. But it would be very good in any approach to healing if we start at the center and then move outward from that. Because when we see, let's say we have a wheel, again, to use that illustration. When you look at the wheel from the center, everything seems proportionate to everything else. But if it were a very big wheel, and you were not at the center, but way off toward a rim, everything would seem sort of out of focus, out of proportion. You wouldn't understand quite how everything was related. You'd see very wide angles here and very narrow over there, whereas actually the whole thing was round, and the angles are actually completely even. This, if we can take our understanding and bring it right to the hub of our reality as a human being, not just the reality of spiritual consciousness, but as a human being, and then work outward from that reality, everything else would begin to fall into place. So what I wanted to do this morning was to present this approach to our healing seminar, this approach to what I think is a very, very important thing nowadays, and what we want to get into here at Ananda. We would like to start a healing center, a natural healing center here that deals with these things without being unrealistic about other levels of realities, but works outward from that hub. Now, what does this mean in a more practical way? Some doctor who practiced Kriya Yoga also, he made a very interesting statement. He said that he found that people who practice Kriya Yoga have far fewer physical troubles than other people. Well, that corroborates what I'm saying, because Kriya Yoga is a technique that helps to strengthen that flow of energy in the spine. But there are other ways that that flow of energy can be strengthened and can be brought into harmony. One is, as Sri Yukteswar pointed out, wearing astrological bangles, because these pure metals or these pure gemstones have a strong magnetic radiation, an astral radiation, which helps to strengthen the aura of your body. And so by wearing these things, especially they have to touch the skin, the stones have to be pure and not less than 2 carats. And that makes it a bit difficult. 1 carat diamonds now are selling for $15,000, and you've got to get a 2 carat diamond. They've doubled recently, and they've been going up very fast. Diamond is for those who have a weakness in or an affliction to mercury, which I guess a lot of people have. The other stones, too, are becoming quite costly. The sun is ruby. Emerald is, I said mercury. Did I say Venus? Mercury, I said. I meant Venus. Emerald is for Mercury. Yellow sapphire is for Jupiter. Blue sapphire is for Saturn. And coral for Mars, and pearl for the moon. The north and south nodes of the moon are cinnamon garnet, which is called a gomed in India, and the south node is the cat's eye. So these stones, according to an affliction of these particular planets, can be helpful, or you can wear all of them, which is the most beneficial of all, but it's gone out of sight, I must say. It's no longer what it was even quite recently. But the essence of it is that it helps to strengthen the aura. Now, other things we can do that can strengthen the aura too. I would love to experiment with color therapy. There is a lot of work being done on it, and I feel that it's a very valid approach. I don't know that they have the answers yet. I don't know how well they can make it work, but I believe that in principle it's a good idea, because colors, wearing colors even, helps to strengthen weak colors in the aura. This has been found already by Edgar Cayce and different people who have done actual experiments with it, that this is why you feel naturally drawn to certain colors. You may love reds and hate blues, for example. Well, each color has its own particular vibrations, and those vibrations, every color has its positive and negative. Red, for example, if it's pure, is joyful. Cherries, eating cherries, make you cheerful. And red colors help to make you cheerful, but if they're pure. Muddy red relates to anger, relates to lust, relates to other negative, violent emotions like anger. The same with each one of these colors. They have their vibrations that if they're pure colors, then they uplift. If they're impure colors, if they're muddy, dark, then they tend to depress the consciousness. You go into bars and you notice the amber lights, at least they used to have back in my dark past when I went to bars, had a very negative quality to them. It was almost as if it were demonic. And again, blues have this. This was told me by a Theravada healer from Thailand, a Buddhist priest. He said that he had discovered that people under a blue light, their blood pressure might lower as much as 20 points, and under a red point, it might be raised as much as 20 points. So, if we understand the effect of color, we can use it to help to get to the core of it, because if we can strengthen ourselves, then everything else will fit into place, and we won't need nearly as much of those other influences. Music is another very interesting therapy. Some kinds of music have a very uplifting effect on the mind, and certain instruments are very uplifting too. Violin music is very uplifting. Sitar music, the very vibration of these sounds helps to uplift. Bells have a wonderful quality of sort of dissolving the consciousness. If you listen to bell music, you sort of enter into the melody of it and almost lose yourself in it. These are related to the sounds of the chakras in the spine. And these sounds, if used sensitively and intelligently, can help to raise our level of vibration. A very interesting kind of therapy in this line. Oh, by the way, to speak of gems again, there is a doctor, well, how much of a doctor he is I can't say, but he's maybe not an MD, but he says that he's done a lot of healing with gems that was very effective without people having to buy the gems. Soaking the gems for a certain period of time in alcohol, and then using the alcohol as an essence that people drink from those gems, and he found that they got color therapy through gems, shining light through gemstones onto a person or even onto his photograph, and they have found amazing results with that. Very strange things are coming out in this day and age. Those of you who have had the opportunity to read The Secret Life of Plants will know what I'm talking about. Those who haven't, it's really a very, very interesting book. I don't know how much of the statements are valid. I suspect that some of them aren't. When you're reporting, you can't sift everything. You're putting it out there for other people to do the sifting. And I suspect that some of the things that he's reporting are will prove on further investigation perhaps not to be valid. I don't know. But nonetheless, it's an extremely interesting source book of possibilities. And one of them is just this treatment of photographs as a means of healing, even getting rid of bugs on fields, for example, treating the photograph of the field with DDT instead of the field. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but it's really interesting to look into, because this world is far more subtle than most of us are aware of. And while on certain levels of reality that's where you've got to function, nonetheless, there is great reality in the subtler realms of consciousness, like the story, which is apparently a true story, the life of Milarepa, the great yogi of Tibet, considered Tibet's greatest yogi, bringing on a hailstorm on a particular, this is before he became a yogi, when he was a black magician, and he brought on a hailstorm that destroyed the crops of enemies of his mother. And he made a diagram on a piece of paper and did all his thing on that diagram, but that what he did of the diagram of their farm destroyed only their farm and didn't even cross the fence into the other people's property. A man in Vermont, I believe it is able to witch for water from a map. How? We've got to understand that we're living in a very, very different world from what our senses show us. How could somebody witch for water in a map? It's hard enough to believe that you can witch for water in the first place. Although it does happen. We know it happens. There's too much evidence to support it. That's how we got our well here. But how you can do it from a photograph? Well, it's your consciousness, attuning with that reality through the photograph. Probably that's how it works. The photograph provides enough of a concentration for your mind for it to be happening as if it were happening out there. But the more we can think in this way, the more we can release our minds from the necessity for just physical manipulations, physical drugs, physical kinds of therapy, and more we'll be able to function on a level which is harmless and yet is in itself much more powerful. Now, how can one flow of energy heal many different diseases? Because it's at the top of the echelon. It's the top echelon, I mean. And it works with many levels down here. So that when you're working with that level of energy, you don't necessarily need to know that this person has a broken ankle or this person has a cancer in the intestine and exactly where that cancer is and so on. A medical doctor would say, well, this is absurd. You've got to know at least what the problem is and where it is. But on a certain level, the same treatment will function for the whole body, will function for a vast array of diseases. The same treatment will perhaps keep the body whole on all levels, depending on how high the level of that treatment is. The same thing with Sai Baba, being able, without knowing or thinking about all the specific things that he had to do, just creating that flow, and that necklace was manifested. Another very interesting form of therapy that Shraddha introduced me to was it's known as the Bach flower remedies, and a number of the people here have found these remedies very helpful. A man went out and meditated under different plants, different trees, and felt certain vibrations from those trees, certain states of consciousness, which, in getting an essence from their blossoms, he was able to instill more of that consciousness in people who needed it. Now, this ties in very closely with the teaching of yoga, which says that everything in the world, first of all, is consciousness, and then everything in the world is a mixture of different vibrations, different, essentially, gunas or qualities. Sattva guna, which is an uplifting, spiritualizing vibration. Raja guna, which is an activating, and then tamo guna, which is a darkening, making everything firm, dull, stupid. It sort of depresses the mind back into identification with matter, where Sattva guna uplifts it into identification with spirit. And Raja guna keeps you identified with energy. And these different qualities, they say everything is a mixture of those qualities. They say that the food that you eat, and this is something in your healing seminar brochure that Shraddha put in, different kinds of qualities, different kinds of vibrations that are engendered by different kinds of food that you eat. And Shraddha presumably will be going into them in detail. I mentioned that cherries help to make a person more cheerful. Grapes help to develop love, and so on. She'll go into it in greater detail. But it's really curious to think that different foods actually help to instill different states of consciousness. Corroborating that, I was amused to read, whether it was in The Secret Life of Plants or elsewhere, I don't recall right now, but the flowers, the plants, they played different kinds of music to them, and they found that most of them loved waltz music. They like symphony music. Their favorite seems to be waltz music. And the radish, which the yogis would call a very rajasic plant, very energizing kind of plant, they like jazz. They're in tune with that kind of music. So it's helps to corroborate what the yogis are saying. Well, these Bach flower remedies do work for some people. They don't, again, work for everybody. Sometimes you need a more immediate remedy than can be affected through these things, which may take a longer period of time. Different kinds of medicine will work for different kinds of people, and you've got to find out which you're more attuned to. I think that we need to understand these things, not only that holistic healing should not only be dealing with the whole human being, but that we should understand that it also should embrace all these different methods as being in their own way valid, so that we don't have this division between one and the other, but see how they all basically harmonize with one another. And so, to capitulate, the closer we come to the center of reality, the more we gain control over all aspects of, lower aspects of reality or objective aspects of reality. And secondly, as long as we're dealing with a particular level of reality, we have to work on that level. When you're talking with a child, you have to talk in a language that he would understand. And if you were to use long words and mathematical formulae, then you would lose him. You have to talk to him on his level. You have to deal with every reality on its level. And understand that all of these levels of reality really are spiritual if they're understood in the right way, because all things are manifestations of God. So that in fact, even while dealing with them on a purely physical level of reality, let's say, if you can bring in a spiritual consciousness into what you're doing, you will find that your effectiveness will be much, much greater. I've read of a number of doctors who worked in that way, even though they were MDs and their schooling was on a purely physical level. They didn't dare tell their colleagues what they were doing, but they found that if, while working with their patients, they prayed for guidance, they found they understood what to do. They prayed for power, they found that even in just touching their patients, they healed them. In talking to them, the tone of their voice was healing. And this was the real power that they were using, even though they objectively seemed to be, and to some extent did depend upon their medical knowledge. But so it is that whatever level we work on, and realizing its reality on that level, we must always try to attune ourselves to the highest level and see how much of that highest level, or higher level, if that's all we can reach, a relatively higher level, how much of that we can bring down into these lower levels. So that's what I had to say today.